Hello guys, this is Emma from MindMajix, and I welcome you all to this special session in which our trainer will explain everything you need to know about the Okta. In this video, let us look at the topics we will cover. We shall start with the Okta Admin Console and Okta Applications. Please check the caption to jump between the topics. If you are new to the MindMajix channel, please subscribe and press the bell icon to get quick updates about the new tech tutorials, free webinars, and career-enhancing shots from working professionals. Like and share the video with your friends and IT career aspirants. Without any further delay, let's start the video.
So basically what we have seen till now is like we have gone through Okta and we have understood how do we add people in Okta, how do we manage groups in Okta, how do we add users in Okta, what are the different statuses that we have in Okta. And now the next thing that we are going to study or we are going to look into is the profile editor. So basically if I want to help you understand what a profile editor is all about, so basically first we need to understand the concepts of profiles what we have in Okta. So basically in Okta, we have different types of user profiles. So one is your Okta user and the other is the app user. So we have already seen this that, there are three types of user in Okta. One is, one the created in Okta, one which is coming from the application, and the other is the one coming from the directory. So basically the one which is created in Okta, we call that user as an Okta user, and the one which is coming from the application or which is, helping us to get the attributes of an application, that we call as the app user. So basically the universal directory uses the concept of profiles. It's a logical grouping of attributes to represent user accounts. In particular, universal directory supports two types of profile. One is Okta user profile and the other is the app user profile, which we just discussed right now. So these two profiles are, types which are used to store rich attributes in Okta. They also help us to move rich attributes from Okta to the third-party application, which we have already seen in case of doing SAML integrations or, OIDC integrations, wherein I have showed you that, when we have to pass user attributes from one place to another, we usually use the Okta attributes or Okta expression language, wherein we are using Okta user profile to send or to read attributes of the user and then sending it to the third-party applications. So we use the profile editor to view or modify these profiles, and from where can we see that we have to go to the directory and then go to the profile editor. So here we are under directory, and if we go to the profile editor, that's where we land on into. And over here we can see that all types of applications which we have in our Okta. So basically we have like different types of applications which have been integrated in Okta, and out of all the applications, whatever the mappings we have in Okta, we could see in here. So we have different types of mastered users or the groups. So basically these are the users which are being created and managed by that particular source. Next, we'll talk about the Okta user profile. So it's a logical representation of a user in Okta. The Okta user profile is comprised of two set of attributes. So basically one is the base attributes and the other is the custom or the extensible attributes. So base attributes, you mean like ones which are already available from Okta. It's not something which you have created. It's something that that's already being provided by Okta itself. And then if in case those default attributes or the base attributes does not suffice your requirement, then Okta also provides the capability of creating or or developing or building your own attributes. So you get custom or extensible attributes. So by default, Okta has defined 31 base attributes for all users in an organization. So if I go to Okta application, we can see that this is the type of Okta, and this is like the base or the default profile which we have for all the users in the Okta organization. Over here you could see that we have got 31 attributes which are like base attributes. You could see the attribute type is base here. So all of these are base attributes being provided by Okta, and also you could see that this cross is disabled. We cannot do anything with these set of base attributes, but whenever you will see a custom attribute, you can just have a cross, or you can just cut those attributes. The simple reason being because these are custom attributes, and therefore you can add or delete or modify these attributes, but the base attributes you cannot do anything with those attributes. So, these are attributes which cannot be modified or removed. There are two exceptions, that is first name and last name. These two attributes can be marked as required or optional from Okta mastered users only. So over here, you could see that, you've got first name and the last name. And if I click onto it, right, so I have the option of attribute required, yes or no. I can, select it. You could see, right, everything is disabled apart from these two things. And it goes the same for the last name as well if I click on it. But if in case I go ahead and click on any other attribute, this is also disabled for me. I cannot do anything over here. So basically I cannot make an attribute required or not required, but with first name and last name, based on the organization's requirement, we can make it mandatory or not mandatory as per the policy which has been defined by the organization. So that's how our attributes look like. So this is basically the older version or the older UI version of Okta, which this was the version it was used to look like. But now Okta has come up with a new version of the UI and UX changes they have done. So now this is the new version, how it looks like. So, but yeah, I mean, like the concept or the logic still remains the same, exactly the same. In fact, whatever we have discussed, we still have the ability to define an attribute and check out what are all the base attributes being provided by Okta. Then what are the Okta data types? So there are 8 admissible data types which are being provided by Okta. So first of all, we have a string. It's a chain of 0 or more Unicode characters. So string is something which we all know, right? Like, basically it can comprise of your letters, digits, punctuation marks and stuff like that. So it's a chain of 0 or more Unicode characters. It could, include your alphanumeric characters and stuff like that. Anything which can, which you want to combine in can be considered as a string. So a number, it's a floating point decimal in Java 64-bit double format. It could also be your integer number, but by default we say it as a decimal number. And if we select decimal values as 0, then it becomes an integer value. So, number and integer, they are kind of same data types. The only difference is one is like, your decimal, which contains decimal numbers, which contains decimal, and the integer is the one which is like, without decimals. Boolean, again, it's pretty much the same as what we have in Java. Like, it stores the value as true and false. That are the only two values allowed in the Boolean data type. Then you have date. So date is an important data type because it allows you to kind of stores the calendar days and require the format of ISO 8601. So that's the format which is being generally used all across the environments and all across the world as well. So basically you can use this format for the date. Then you have the array of strings, which is a sequential collection of strings. Then you have array of numbers. Again, same thing. Just the difference is that it's a sequential collection of number, and same as array of integers. Again, same thing. Sequence of something. It's a collection of integers or numbers. Or what is an array? Array is a collection of something in a sequential format. So that's what as the definition, or as the as the name suggests, that's what we have as the definition. Then we have the country code. So 2-character country code as it is listed. So you basically every country has a code, right? Like India has +91, then you have Australia has +64, then Pakistan has +92. So whatever is your country code, based on that you'll get the country code. So that's what, like it's a character which it's a data type which you can usually get from Okta. So these are all the different data types which we have in Okta. So basically what happens is, like, if you want to add a new attribute, so you can define what type of an attribute you require, and basically from here you can select the data type and define your attribute. Then we have just seen what an Okta user profile is. So we have understood that it allows us to send attribute values from Okta to the third-party applications. Now let's try to understand what is an app user profile. So an app user profile represents a user in a third-party application, directory, or identity provider. The app user profile lists the third-party attributes that Okta can read and write. This profile is used to control the attributes that Okta pushes to an app or the attributes imported from an app into Okta. So basically it's like a an application user profile which is there in third party application. Now this user profile is not there in Okta. This user profile is instead present in a third party application. Now what is a third party application? Any application integrated with Okta, we can refer to that application as a third party application. Let's say that we have Salesforce integrated with Okta. So now the profile of a user within Salesforce application, we say that application as a third party application. So now there could be a possibility that a user has its profile in Salesforce. So whatever attributes user is having inside Salesforce, we say that that is their app user profile, because it's something, the schema or the attributes are being defined within the application. It's not defined within Okta application. That's why, and that's the basic difference between an Okta user profile or an app user profile. Okta also is an application, but Okta is not defining those attributes. If Okta is defining those attributes, if the discipline or the schema of the attributes is within Okta, then we say definitely it's an Okta user profile. But if the schema of the attributes is being present inside the application, we say it as the app user profile. It's similar to the Okta user profile. App profiles have both the base attributes and the custom attributes. Custom attributes for the app user profiles differ from those for Okta user profile. Whereas Okta user profiles can be extended with any custom attribute, app user profiles can only be extended with attributes from a predefined list that Okta dynamically generates. Okta generates the list of attributes by querying the third-party applications or directly for supported attribute. So basically what is going to happen is that, Okta is going to read the third-party application. So it's going to query what are all the custom attributes being allowed in that application. So now every application is going to have a different schema, right? Every application cannot have a same schema. Like let's consider we have Salesforce application and we have PagerDuty application. So Salesforce application is going to have a different set of schema, whereas PagerDuty application is going to have a different set of schema. So now these two applications cannot have same set of schema, but how will Okta come to know, right? So Okta has to query these applications and it will come to know, okay, what are all the supported attributes in these applications. Let's say that Salesforce supports kind of 10 or to 15 custom attributes only, whereas PagerDuty supports 20 to 25 custom attributes. So Okta has to make that, has to have that understanding what are all the custom attributes being supported by the application, and accordingly it allows you to create the custom applications in Okta for that particular app user profile. So that's that's the basic difference between an Okta user profile and the app user profile. Now if I just have to give you a quick overview of how it looks like. So basically you can see that this is Okta. So this, you will just get to see just one application. These are all your applications. So these are all dummy applications which I've created, but if in case I go ahead and look into mappings, so these are all the attributes being sent from application to Okta. So we can map anything. If in case the attribute exists inside Okta, inside that application, this Pranjal-Salesforce, if the application attribute exists, then I can refer to that attribute, maybe like app.firstname. I'm mapping that app.firstname to my Okta username. And if in case the mapping has to be reversed, like if it is going from Okta to Pranjal-Salesforce application, then I can just kind of add attributes or do the mapping over here and then finally save the mapping. So it allows us to do both kind of mappings, that is from app to Okta or Okta to app, and that depends on us. So you have apps, then you have directories. If in case you have different directories being integrated, like your Active Directory or the LDAP directory, then in that scenario you can have the mapping being done here. And also if you have identity providers, although 99% of the times you are going to see that Okta is going to act as your identity provider, but in some scenarios, like you might have maybe LinkedIn or maybe Google, who are being integrated with your Okta as the identity provider. In that scenario, Okta doesn't act as your identity provider. In fact, Okta acts as a service provider, leveraging you to helping you to leverage Okta services. Like if in case some single sign-on application has been integrated with Okta, so now Okta is giving permission to the end user that you get authenticated via Google and you can leverage the application which I have under me. So that's like Okta acting as a service provider instead of acting as the identity provider. So that's pretty much it about what we have under profile editor. Then, if in case we want to understand a little bit on mappings, so we have profile mappings, which allows the administrators to precisely control the attributes exchanged during the provisioning process. For a list of apps that integrate particularly well with universal directory, we have apps supporting profile mapping. The two chief use cases that universal directory facilitates are app to Okta and then Okta to app. Just now we saw that thing that we have application to Okta mapping and Okta to application mapping. In the very first case, we have application to Okta. Organizations typically use a source of truth app such as a directory or the human resources system, and some organizations might have several sources of truth. Mappings define how attributes from these various sources are imported into Okta user profile. So what are mappings, right? So mapping is something that you are telling, okay, I have this attribute value in this particular application, and I am mapping or sending this particular value to this particular attribute in your application. So whenever there is a two-party or a two-way communication and information has to be exchanged, so there has to be some mapping, right? Like what information should be exchanged with what attribute in which application is something we define under mappings. So that's what mapping helps you to do. So if we talk about mappings app to Okta, so basically this is your application, these are your two different applications, and now you are just mapping it to the Okta. So your first name and last name is coming from Active Directory, your manager details or your boss information is coming from Workday, and finally all of this information is being stored in Okta. So Okta acts as a single source of truth, and the mapping is from different applications. You can have reverse mapping, that is from Okta to app. In the second use case, organizations want to propagate the data in Okta to other applications to provision accounts and update accounts with rich data. This is possible if the Okta user profile has rich attributes and the app in Okta supports provisioning. So now the concept of provisioning is very important. Why do we do this kind of a mapping? Is like we are expecting that new users whosoever are coming, they would be getting their attribute values from Okta. So now in order to create new users inside the application, we require that Okta should support provisioning for that application. Now, if Okta itself is not allowing that, is not allowing the creation of that new user, how will Okta send the attribute values for that new user, right? So that's why we have OIN connectors, wherein Okta actually supports the provisioning concept, wherein you have some OIN which we are going to discuss in our next session. But OIN is a Okta integration network, and these are like having default provisioning connectors available. You can still have in case like the default connector doesn't support, you can still go ahead with the skim provisioning. If you are doing a SAML integration, if you are doing OIDC, then we cannot do provisioning in Okta. Okta doesn't support any provisioning for OIDC app. But if in case you are doing SAML integration, in those scenario, you can do skim provisioning even if you have done a custom integration. So Okta should support provisioning. If Okta is supporting provisioning, then in that scenario, Okta to application mapping makes sense. So Okta would be sending some last name attribute value, first name attribute value, boss value, and that and all would be finally be created inside the application with the same value which Okta is sending. So that mapping makes sense. We have little bit discussed about this using expressions. We'll discuss a little bit more about what do we have expressions. I have told you that we use expressions in order to send data, and whenever we are using Okta user profile, in those scenarios we usually use expressions. So expressions within the mapping lets you modify attributes before they are stored in Okta or sent to apps. They allow you to concatenate attributes, manipulate string, convert data types, and many more things. Okta supports a subset of the Spring expression language function. So basically what does it mean is that, if I just go to the if I just go to the application where we were, trying to send certain attributes in Okta, right? This was the place wherein, we were trying to send certain attributes. Now, one of the best example to see is this particular attribute only. Over here, we are trying to concatenate two different strings. We don't have any attribute in Okta which directly gives us the full name, but we have attributes in Okta which gives individually the first name and individually the last name. And as per the logic says, We just need to combine these two names to, get the full name. So all of these, data transformation and stuff can be done through Okta expression language. Let's suppose that, you have an email ID like test@abc.com, but you just require to extract something just before whatever string value you have before you just require that. You don't want, the value to be returned after in your email ID. So, you can do all those data transformations, and basically it is using Java Spring language. So, all the substring function, concatenate function, or, trim functions, whatever we have these, functions in Java, all of those will work over here. So while some functions work in other areas of the product, so all the functions do not do. I mean, like I just mentioned that some of them should work, but all of them will not work. Like substring works, then concatenate works, then trim works, but like all of them doesn't work. Like, if you think like, let's go ahead and put some for else and, if else, for, switch, do while, all of these functions doesn't work. So expressions are useful for maintaining data integrity and formats across apps. For example, you might wish to use an email prefix as a username, but replace an email suffix or populate attributes based on a combination of existing ones. So, this is your display name. Let's suppose you want to display it in like, like the last name, comma, first name. So you can definitely do it via like, this expression language. So, and the other thing we just discussed right now, like if in case you just want, you have an email and you want something only to be extracted before @, so you can do it using expression languages. So all of this, whatever we see here, this is all in expression language, like source.first name, user.last name, and stuff like that. So that's what we understood over here, and that's what we have under directory sections. We also have a self-registration or a self-service registration tab over here, which just allows you to like show you that whenever you try to do a registration, you will be able to see these attributes over here, and what will happen post registration. So whenever a new user gets into Okta, so they will be having these set of attributes which they have to fill in, and basically once they register on the form, they would be asked to verify their email address, and finally they will be redirected to the Okta user dashboard. So that's something that we can manage it from the self-service registration of new users coming into Okta. Also, we have a directory integration tab, although it is usually covered in the advanced training of Okta. But if I just have to brief you, right, like many a times in this fundamental course also, I have mentioned that when directories are integrated, when Active Directory is integrated or LDAP directory is integrated, from where are those directories getting integrated? This is the place to integrate a directory in Okta. So if in case you have an Active Directory, external Microsoft Windows Active Directory, and you want to integrate that, so you go here and you have two options to integrate. You can do an Active Directory integration or an LDAP directory integration. So basically once your directory is integrated, and whatever groups or OUs you are sending from your directory to the application, which we have the option to select from Okta itself, once the directory is integrated, you get all the users whatever you have in Active Directory. And this is like one of the major things done in most of the organization, because 99% of the organizations have Active Directory or the LDAP directories, and if they have Okta environment, so definitely they go ahead and do integrations with those directories. And this is a very important topic being asked in many interviews, like based on directory integrations, if somebody has performed. So this is basically covered in our advanced course of Okta, but just to give an overview of what directory integrations is, so it just allows you to import people from different or existing sources which are there in the environment but not in Okta. So you just need to integrate with Okta in order to get all those people. Then finally you have profile sources. Currently, since we don't have any directory integrated, hence we do not see anything over here. But if in case we have more than one Active Directory or more than one LDAP directory, or multiple Active Directory or multiple LDAP directories being integrated, then we would be able to see all those Active Directories or LDAP directories over here. And then we can define the order of those directories, like which directory should be given the preference, or or what should be the profile source. So it's kind of a profile master It's an application that acts as a source of truth for user profile attributes. User can only be sourced by a single application or a directory at a time. And the priority determines which application or directory is considered the profile source for a user who is assigned to multiple profile applications or directories. So let's suppose there is a user who has been tagged or assigned to multiple directories, and which directory is going to define the attribute, or which directory would master, or would be the first source of would be the profile master of that particular user. So based on the priority, whichever directory is on the top, that directory would be actually defining the attribute of the user. So that's what the profile sources are all about. Currently we don't have any profile sources in our environment, hence we do not say it. But once we integrate different directories in our system, we would be able to see them, and then accordingly we can just change the position of those attributes. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. And we'll just cover this particular thing in this particular class. So we have covered what directory is all about. We have understood people and groups. Now we have understood the profile editor, directory integration, self-service, and profile sources. Next, we are going to talk mostly under the security tab. This is again a very important tab. So I'll try to cover most of the fundamental parts on the security tab, and then we'll take it from there. So basically, what we have covered till now is we have seen this directory tab. We worked around, or we have seen a little bit of how do we add people in Okta, or what are the different ways to add people in Okta. Then we also saw that what are the different groups which we can have in Okta, like the Active Directory groups, application groups, Okta groups. We went through the profile editor, understanding what is the meaning of profile editor and why do we require it in Okta. Then directory integrations was one of the most important topics which I mentioned last time, that it's been asked in interviews a lot. So this was one thing which we haven't seen it practically, but fundamentally we have understood that what are directory integrations, and what is the purpose of doing directory integrations. Then we also saw the self-service registration page, wherein we have a little bit of knowledge of why do we require it when new users are onboarded to Okta. Then what configurational changes we can do from this particular self-registration page. And then we finally went through the profile sources, wherein we saw that if we have different applications or different directories integrated with Okta, in that scenario we can see those directories or different apps in the profile sources. From wherever the profile we are receiving the profile, we can see them in the profile sources, and also we can decide the priority of these profile resources. So that's what we had under the directory tab. So this is one of the more this is one of the important tabs under Okta which we should understand. And then another second, I mean, this is the most important tab, to be honest, which we have under the admin console, that is security tab. I mean, dashboards and customizations are something, they are they are being customization especially is being newly introduced by Okta. So basically it is not covered a lot under fundamentally, because a lot of customizations are required sometimes on the Okta training. So we can go through the customizations tab, but from fundamental point of view it's not very important. But from advanced Okta training point of view, yes, it is important. So we'll start with the security tab today. And once we are covered with this topic, we'll go through this customization tabs and short, and we'll see that what are the different types of customizations which Okta allows us to do. But for the time being, we'll stick ourselves to the security tab. So under security, we can see that we have many other topics or many other subtopics, we could say. So under security, we have a general, we have health insights, then authentication, multi-factor, identity provider, delegated authentication, networks, behavior detection, administrator, API, and API tokens. So one by one, we'll go through each one of them. There would be a little bit of theoretical part. There little bit of I'll use the Okta environment itself to help you explain. So we'll start off with the very first topic, that is the general. So as I've opened the general tab, so you could see that there are some general configuration settings which you can configure in Okta, which includes some if you want to have new sign-on notification email. So whenever a user is getting into the is getting onboarded in Okta, do you want the end users to be notified with an email? If yes, then make it enabled. If no, then make it disabled. Then if users are changing their passwords or stuff like that, then they should be triggered with an email. So I have kept it disabled, but most of the times you will see that this is enabled for most of the organizations. Then MFA enrolled notification email is disabled or not. So when a person is getting enrolled for an MFA, whether the person should be sent a notification email or not, a reset notification email when the MFA has been reset again. Then at that point of time, whether the user should be sent with a notification email or not. Then report suspicious activity via email. So there are a lot of times that for a particular user in Okta, because Okta uses a little bit of intelligence on the system to identify which user is kind of a suspicious user and which is a legitimate user. Now think of a scenario wherein you have a user ID and password, but you yourself is not trying to log into the environment, but instead someone else is trying to log in with your ID and he or she doesn't know your password. He or she knows your username but doesn't know your password. So at that point of time, that user might be, that hacker or that malicious or the suspicious person could be again and again trying with different sets of passwords. He might think you have it, and at that point of time, Okta would actually identify whether this is a suspicious user or not. So at that point of time, if there are a lot of unsuccessful login attempts, so Okta would automatically send those emails to the end user saying that someone is trying to get into the system. Is it you or not? So something like that. So this allows the users to report activities they do not recognize from email notifications. So generally this is enabled in all the organizations. Then from an organization perspective, we have remember me checkbox on sign in. So basically if you are trying to log into Okta using your normal browser, I mean normal browser window, not in incognito, not a private window, but just a normal window. So in that scenario you get an option to remember me. So basically if you checkbox that thing, so the browser saves, or your account gets saved in the browser cache, and basically next time when you log into the environment, you don't have to log in again. Instead, because you have a session already created with browser, it will automatically log you in the normal windows. This will not happen in incognito windows, but with normal windows, yes, it will happen. So basically we can make it disabled, although because it's never a good practice to go ahead and enable it, because users are usually, they don't want to enter their username and password again and again, which is not a good practice, to be honest. Because if you have your browser session always there, and you don't have to log in that scenario, it's a little bit of compro, it's a little bit of security breach. The simple reason being, because if your system is hacked, your all the applications with which your browser is logged in, that is also hacked. So that's definitely not supportive and not recommended at all. Then activation emails are valid for 7 days. Basically whenever you get the activation emails, right, like for example, you are whenever a user is onboarded to Okta, from an admin perspective, we trigger the activation emails to the user in order to set their password, and in order to reset their password. So those activation emails are being valid for 7 days. We can make it to 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hours, 8 hours, one day. And these are all the drop down options which we have. We cannot customize it. As you can see that there is no option I can add it on my own. Like if I want it to be maybe at 16 hours, it doesn't allow me that. Either I can have 8 hours or one day. So basically whatever options Okta gives, we can have that. I can make it valid for 30 days. I can change it, but I cannot add my own option. So that's a limitation which Okta comes up with, but that's fine. They are still giving us a lot of options which we can pick and choose, and accordingly decide what our organization wants to have this policy for. Then enforce device binding for creating sessions. So basically this is again a same thing, so you can have the device bindings for creating the sessions. And what this actually means is that for example, you are being uh, logged in with a particular device, you have a particular laptop and you are being logged in with that laptop, so you don't have to log in again and again.
So this is something like, I mentioned above, like the browser cache, because, you have logged in with that browser with your certain ID, maybe your, work ID or something, and now you have a session created, you don't have to log in again and again. So same thing happens, like, if you're logged in with a device, maybe if you're logged in with your phone, so you don't have to log in again and again, right? Like device binding is there for all the applications like Facebook, Instagram. You are not logging into these applications every day, right? You have a device and from which there is an application you have installed, you have logged in once, and now you are logged in forever. So that's what happens, like, you can have device binding for creating sessions, but that's again not a recommended approach for Okta, because Okta is mostly used on the web versions. Instead, it is not, like you won't see much use of Okta on your mobile phones. So basically anything on web, it's not recommended that, you create sessions, or, you have that cache stored in your browser, which has a lot of confidential data. So yeah, that's like, now we have Okta Mobile. So basically, it's pretty much talking about the Okta device or the Okta application on the phone. So basically, you have a sign-on feature in which you can ask for PIN, whether a user is inactive for 10 minutes, PIN expires or not. You can choose after how much time the PIN would expire and all and all. And you have Okta extension for iOS app, so it allows the app extension for iOS Safari to sign on to the SAML apps. So basically Safari is a iOS browser, that's why we have this extension. And then you have Okta threat insight settings. So basically authentication requests from IPs exhibiting suspicious behavior that suggests malicious activity can be logged in the system log. They can be rate limited or blocked based on threat level. And whenever we can over here choose, if in case there is any threat activity being discovered by Okta or being detected by Okta, what do we have to do? Either we don't have to take any action, or we log in authentication attempts from the malicious IP, and basically, or we have the option to log in and enforce security based on threat level. And then we have zones, which we are going to cover when we'll talk about the networks over here. But zones are specific places wherein regional places which are being divided or segregated all over the world in order to understand what are the IPs belonging to that particular region. So you can exempt zones from here. So these are some of the general settings which we have under Okta, or under security tab of Okta. Next, we'll quickly go through the health insights once. We'll see what does this health insights helps us to understand, or helps us in Okta from security point of view. So basically, in health insights, you'll see a lot of incomplete, then you'll see complete, and then finally dismissed. So over here, you'll see that one of the security impacts, which is critical, is that, it's saying that you have more than 75% admin who have super admin privileges. Now, if I go to admin, right, so I could see that, I have a lot of admins, which are, super admins. You can see all of them are in fact super admins. So that's never a good practice actually. We should have limited number of people as the super admin, because right now what this organization have is, like, if it has around 20 people, out of those 10 or 15 people are super admin. Now to manage 20 users, we don't require 15 super admins. Okay, we just require maybe one or two super admin users to manage all those 20. And if you're talking about large organizations with around, like, 1 lakh of users, in those scenarios we require a team of super admin users, which could be somewhere around 5 to 7 or 7 to 10, not more than 10 to 15 super admin users. But right now I'm having more than 75% of my users who are super admin. So like, if in case I have 20 users, so that means at least 15 or more users are super admin users, which is definitely not recommended at all. So that's why this is a critical, security impact. The reason being because now anyone in your organization, suppose I have an organization with 20 people in my organization, and if I give everyone the super admin privileges, so anyone can do anything. Like, then why do we have a different level of roles, or permissions or administrative rights, when everyone is to get the highest level of privileges? So that's why like, people should be given access as per their role, or as per their job profile, but they shouldn't be given the complete level of access when they're not responsible for doing that. I mean, like, there could be many people here in Okta which does not require to have complete super admin privileges. So we do not need to give them. We can just create them a simple end user, give the, if even if they require something based on their role and stuff, so we can create a custom role based on their role. If they're an application admin, we can make them an app admin. If they are a group admin, we can make them a group admin and stuff like that. Then threat insights is not enabled to block suspicious IPs. So basically we haven't enabled the threat insights over here in Okta in order to block the suspicious IPs, which is again a kind of a security risk, and that's why it shows us critical. Then we have password change notifications we have disabled. So these are all incomplete health insights. Okta is kind of going to show you what are all the things which you should do in order to make your environment more securable. But if in case you don't want to follow it, then it's your wish, then it comes as an incompleted task. But if in case you feel that no, this should be done, then I can just go over here, and maybe let's keep this as enabled and then save it. And now let's go back to the health insights. So you'll see that that particular factor which was coming is gone, and now this has become from 43% to 50%. So as an Okta developer or as an Okta administrator especially, you should see all these recommendations which Okta is giving. It's part of a live audit being done by Okta. It's reading your environment on that particular moment, and it is suggesting you what changes you should do in order to make it more secure. So you should definitely follow the changes or the recommendations being provided by Okta under health insights. And if in case you feel that this, like for example, but I have an organizational policy in which I have 20 members, but out of those 15 has to be super admins, and I cannot do anything. So I can just leave it. Then in that scenario, I don't have to take an action. It's not necessary that I have to take an action on every recommendation being provided by Okta, but it's always a good practice to take an action on the recommendations provided by Okta. So basically, whatever the other recommendations, we should just go through it, and what are the completed recommendations we have done, or what are all the dismissed. You can just maybe dismiss some of the recommendations. Suppose, and this is the one I feel that I am not never going to change, so I can just go ahead and dismiss it. So basically my task is completed now. So my percentage is increasing, and now this would be coming under the dismiss task. I can if in case like later on I change my mind that I know I can go ahead and make this recommendation work out. In that scenario, I'll just undo it, but otherwise I can just dismiss all of them. And if in case I just dismiss all of them, my percentage would just keep on increasing. So you'll see that now it's 78, and then finally it will be 100%. So basically I have dismissed a lot of tasks, and that's why I don't see anything. But that's like something based on your requirement, based on your organizational policies, you have to decide what action you have to take on it. So that's pretty much your health insight feature under security tab. And next we have the authentication tab, and this is again a very important tab for us to understand. A lot of authentication policies are being written in Okta under authentication tab. So it's important for us to understand what does this tab means, and how do we play around with this tab. So you'll see that you have authentication over here, and you have the ability to create on add a new password policy. Now why do we require this? Why do we require this tab? So, and when do we have this tab active? So basically whenever the users are getting logged into Okta, right, whenever a user is trying to get into Okta, at that point of time when the user enters the credentials, that is their username and password, and when they click on submit, that's when this authentication tab in Okta comes into picture, or active. So whatever you write over here, that will be implemented at that point of time. The event would be when you are kind of entering your credentials and hitting on enter. That at that point of time, these policies or these rules would be triggered. So under authentication, we have got a couple of categories. One is the password and the other is the sign on. So basically because we are talking about Okta, right? And if you're talking about security, so password is one of the most important things for us to, help us save from security point of view. Any hacker, any hacker trying to get into your account, they require your password. Not just password today now, because we have multi-factors of authentication, like 2 level, 3 level, so they might require other things as well. But the very first factor for every organization, for every account you have or any application, it requires a password, right? So it's very, a very basic and a very important thing for us to understand, what level of password or what complexity of password we should have in order to, get ourselves safe from all these outside world attacks. So basically, if I come over here, I have the option of password and a sign on. I have the option to, add a new password policy. Under password policy, you could see that, you have password settings, wherein, you could say that the minimum length of my password has to be whatever, the number of characters you decide, I decide as 10. Then, whether it has to have a lowercase, it has to have an uppercase, a number, a symbol. It should not contain your first name, it should not contain your last name, it should not contain your username. And then restrict use of common password like test@123, your maybe your name @123, or maybe password @123, something like that. So these are all very common passwords being used by many of the users, and hackers can easily guess these passwords and get into the system. So we don't have to use these common passwords. Even if we are using it, Okta has its own list. Okta will check or query that list if the password which is being entered by the user is something which is a common password. If it is, then it will not allow you if you will check this box. Then a minimum password age is like, you can decide how many days minimum password age is. Then password expires after how many days, and then you can just prompt the user before some particular days that your password is going to expire, so that the user can change it on time. Then after unsuccessful login, the malicious activity I was talking about, right? Like you have the username but you don't know the password, so you're again and again trying to enter into your system with some nonsense password which is not the correct one. So in that scenario, we can write a password policies that if there has been already more than 10 unsuccessful attempts, just lock the account. Don't allow the user. Now, don't allow the actual user as well to get into the system, because system doesn't know whether it's an actual user or a hacker. So the account would be that has to be unlocked by the administrator. But like if someone has already given 10 attempts and they all have been unsuccessful, then that means like account has to be locked. And it happens with everywhere. If you go to SBI website, over there also you get an option to just put your credentials 3 times. Fourth time you put it incorrect, your account is locked. And even on iPhones, like again and again you're trying to enter your face ID, I mean your passcode, which is not correct, and maybe 5 or 10 times, then your account is locked for like 15 minutes. You cannot use the system then. So that that's like a general policy being implemented everywhere you'll see, and Okta also allow all these general policies. Then account is automatically unlocked. If the account is locked, we can decide like for SBI, it's like the account is unlocked after 1 day. For iPhone, it's like after 15 minutes it will be unlocked. So basically we can decide when the account should be unlocked, and show lockout failures and send lockout emails to the user. So basically once their account is locked, we can just send them the emails. Then there is account recovery option also. For example, you have forgotten your password, so now how do you get back into your account? So you have the option either to go through it by an email or through SMS also. If I check this SMS, then you have the option to go through it by SMS also, and we can have those emails or SMS being sent valid for like 1 hour, or if in case we want to increase, we can do that. And password recovery question complexity is 4 character. So basically, whatever are the recovery questions that you have said, that has to have minimum 4 characters to it. If in case they don't have it, you won't allow it. So we can just go ahead and create a policy. Once we create a policy, we could see that something like this. We have got some test password policies. So you could see that there are being policies being created over here. Now you can just go ahead and activate the policy, or deactivate the policy, or edit the policy if you have already created. So basically, this is how you create a password policy here in Okta. And the other important thing which you could see is like, you have numbers over here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means like, number one is like the highest priority. This would be the very first policy that would be implemented whenever, we are talking about the authentication tabs and all. And also we'll understand to which set of users this is going to be implemented. So basically this is being assigned to the admin group. Now a user who is part of this admin group, so this would be the first policy that would be implemented for them. If the user is part of other groups as well, and if the user is not part of this group and some other group, then this policy would be implemented. But you'll see that both of them are are having the same assigned to group. So if the person is a part of this group, so definitely this policy would be implemented, and then this policy would be implemented, and then this policy. Now if someone who is a part of everyone group but not a part of admin group, so in that scenario policy 3, or this test password policy would be implemented on them, because the very first two, they are not the audience for whom we want to apply this policy. So that's a very good feature which we have. Like we could have different password policies being kept for different people. Like for end users, we could have some set of policies. For admins, we could have different. For finance, because it's like a lot of confidential or restricted information over there, we could have a different set of policy for finance team and all. So basically based on different teams or the groups, we can have different policies, password policies created. So that's how we create a password policy. Now we'll move on to the sign-on policy. So basically sign-on policies again, if I just go ahead and see it, so I can just go ahead and decide what would be my policy name and to which set of people it will be assigned. So like I have created two policies, one policy. If I don't create anything, so I by default I have a policy created by Okta itself. If in create I create something, then in I can decide to whom it has to be applied. So right now I've kept it as everyone. I can kept it as admin group or anything, like I can just update the policy. So now this set of policy will only be applied to the people who are present in this group. Now, once I create a policy over here, I have to add a rule. Until unless I don't add a rule, that policy doesn't make any sense, because eventually what this policy is going to do is something you will define in a rule. So you can have multiple rules for a single policy. It's not necessary that you can have just one rule. That's why we have this hierarchy, that you create a policy and then you assign a rule to it. So you could see that you have a rule name. You can decide what if you want to exclude certain users from this particular rule. And if you can check, you can see that if a user's IP is somewhere in zone, not in zone, anywhere, and authenticate via like something, then we can select the behavior, the risk type, then access is allowed or not, and then prompt for MFA and stuff like that. So maybe if in case I say allowed and then prompt for MFA. So like now MFA would be prompted. Now you can say that it's per device every time, or per session. Then if it is a per session, you need to give them what is the factor lifetime, how much time after the session expires, and then you can finally create a rule. So there are different set of rules being created over here. And once these policies are being created, at that point of time you could see that whenever the user is trying to get into it, these policies are being implemented. At that point of time, these policies run, and whatever you have written over here, that would make sense to the end user. So that's what you have under authentication policies. Next we'll see we'll go through multi-factor ones. So we'll see what are the different Okta MFA support provided. So we have Okta Verify, we have authentication SMS, or we could directly see from here as well. So we have Okta Verify, we have SMS authentication, we have Google authentication, FIDO to web authentication, semantic VIP on-premise, MFA, RSA secure ID, and email authentication. So out of these, whatever you see as green text, so these are being already configured here in our environment. That doesn't mean that these cannot be configured. We can configure all these as well, but like in our test environment, we don't have the ability to do that. Like on-premise MFA means that you require a chip or certain thing which you'll be entering in your system, and then only you'll be able to do it. So we cannot go ahead and activate this. I mean, we can activate it, but like this will not make any sense for us. So even if I'm trying to activate, this is not getting activated, then all these things actually require. So this is activated now, semantic. We require, users must install VIP access app on their mobile phone. So, this is a requirement for it. Again, we can activate Fido2. This is not possible because like this is an on-premise thing, so that's why it's not possible. We can also not activate the RSA secure ID. So yeah, so basically we can activate all these factors, and now this is once these factors are kind of configured, you can add multi-factor policies over here, same as that you have configured authentication policy. You'll first create an MFA policies, and then you will create a rule in order to create an MFA policy. So now we'll understand, we have gone through the multi-factors. Now we'll see the identity providers. So basically we have, we have this concept of adding identity providers here in Okta. Now, why do we add identity providers is because that, if in case you 99% of the times you will see that, Okta would be acting as your identity provider. Because, Okta would be the one holding all the identities with it. Coming from different applications or directories, or the users being created in Okta directly itself. But sometimes it's required that you want to add different, like maybe social platforms as your identity provider, and you want to leverage the services of Okta. Like when I say leverage the services, so there could be a possibility that you have an application integrated with Okta, and now you want to go to that application using, maybe you want to like log into Gmail and then directly use that application which is integrated with Okta. In that scenario, you have to bring in Gmail or Google as your identity provider in Okta. So now if I go ahead and add identity provider, I could see the list of all those applications which are being supported as an identity provider with Okta. I can add any of these identity providers with Okta. I could see that oh, so basically I could see that I have different set of applications which are being providing me IDP. So I can add Amazon IDP, Apple IDP, Discord IDP, Facebook IDP, GitHub, GitLab, Google IDP, LinkedIn IDP, Microsoft OpenID Connect, PayPal, SAML 2.0, Salesforce, Spotify, Zero, and Yahoo Japan IDP. So these are all these set of applications or the identity providers with which I can go ahead and configure in my system. If I just choose with Google, so there are a certain settings which I have to perform in order to set this identity provider with Google, which is covered obviously under advanced section. We do not cover identity providers under fundamental section, but basically the concept of identity provider is that now your Google, if you added Google as your identity provider, so basically Google is going to authenticate the identity, checking its own database. And if Google says yes, that it's a legitimate user, allow this user, we are going to directly use Okta's services, I mean that Okta's applications which are integrated, and we'll directly land into Okta, and we'll just move to those, or we'll redirect to those applications to which we want to get into. So it's a practical lab which which we have it covered in our advanced section, but for the time being we'll understand that the identity providers is something in which your Okta is going to act as the service provider, and the third party identity provider which you are configuring is going to act as your identity provider. So you also have routing rules over here which you can add, and which you can definitely support. I mean, you can add a routing rule over here. There's a default rule created. So you can see that if there is a user's IP is coming from anywhere and the device platform is any device, I can go ahead and choose the devices like iOS or Android. But right now I'm saying if it's an any device and the user is accessing any application and user matches anything, then use this identity provider, which is Okta. And over here we already have that one identity provider, which is this particular developer registration. So this is an Okta IDP, and that's how Okta uses, that's how Okta becomes an IDP everywhere right now. But like if I add my own identity provider, in that scenario I can create a rule in which I could say that basically if in case like user's IP is coming anywhere and user matches this application, then use this identity provider, which would be something else which I have added as an identity provider. So that's basically your identity providers here under the security tab. Next we have the delegated authentication. So basically, delegated authentication is usually, same concept which we have discovered or which we have discussed under directory integration tabs. We require delegated authentication is because what is delegation? Delegation is basically, distributing your responsibilities or, segregating your work into different halves. So basically, like, if in case like Okta is integrated with Active Directory and there is an AD delegation being provided. So we discussed the concept of JIT, that is just-in-time provisioning. In that scenario, delegation comes in very handy, where Okta tells Active Directory or the LDAP directory that you go ahead and authenticate the identities based on your database. So that's what delegated authentication is all about. We have already discussed the same. Like now, if we want to configure an Active Directory, I just go land onto that same directory integration tab we could see here, right? So it's exactly the same what we have discussed before. So there is nothing much to delegate authentication. Next, we have the network zones. So basically, I'll use a little bit of theoretical session to understand what are network zones. So basically, we have the network zone is the security parameters used to limit or restrict access to a network based on a single IP address, one or more IP address range, or a list of geolocations. Network zones are defined and maintained by admins who wish to improve and strengthen network security for their organization and users. To access network zone, navigate to security and networks from the admin console. So basically, if I go here, I'm into security and then I can just go to network. So basically, what is a zone? It's a security parameter used to limit or restrict access to a network based on a single IP address or more IP addresses, or a list of geolocations. So based on like IP address or geolocations, I can restrict a zone or a region wherein access will be only provided to that particular zone. So they are being defined and maintained by admins who wish to improve and strengthen the network security for their organization and users. Network zone consists of two types of zones. One are the IP zones and the other are the dynamic zones. Network zones may be incorporated into policies, application sign-on rules, VPN notifications, and integrated Windows authentication. Policies and rules are updated automatically when a zone definition is modified, and there may be 100 zones which may be configured in Okta. So there can be up to 100 zones. You can configure different types of zones in Okta. Each zone may contain 150 gateway IPs and 150 proxy IPs. So, basically over here, if I come, you can, add two types of zone. One is the IP zone and the other is the dynamic zone. And under this, you have the gateway IP and the proxy IP. So you can add up to 150 gateway IPs and 150 proxy IPs. So, yeah. And IP blacklist zone may contain up to 1,000 gateways per zone and up to a total of 25,000 per organization. So basically, we discuss about two types of zones. So one is the IP zone. It is a type of zone where the network parameter is defined by the IPs, and the dynamic zone is the type of zone where the network parameter is defined by either the IP or the geolocation. So that's how we define the zones. Then we have the dynamic zone. So under dynamic zone, we can either define the geolocation for a dynamic zone. If the geolocation for the network zone feature is enabled, we can use the geographical specifications when configuring the zone. So, if in case I go ahead and want to configure the, zone, so I can, based on the locations, maybe I want to do it for India, I can, add it. And then, under India, I can decide which state, maybe Telangana, or maybe I can decide, okay, which state, Uttarakhand, anything, I can just add these over here. Then then we have autonomous system numbers for a dynamic zone. They are used to uniquely identify each network on the internet. ISPs, which is internet service providers, can apply to obtain one or more ASNs assigned to them. While in ISP, same name can change, their assigned ASN is reserved and immutable. So we have autonomous system numbers for a dynamic zone, which are used to uniquely identify each network on the internet. So there could be many internet networks on the internet with certain names and some unique ID which will help them identify which network it is. So these numbers actually helps us to from these numbers actually helps us to identify from which network they are coming on internet. So even if the name changes, ASN doesn't change. So we kind of have internet service provider can have their name change, but they won't have their ASN change. That is your autonomous system number. This feature enables ASNs for dynamic zone configurations. Once configured, a dynamic zone with ASNs may then be included as part of sign-on policies, MFA policies, app sign-on policies, app VPN notification settings, or IDP routing rules. So whatever we have seen till now, right, like MFA policies, authentication policies, application policies, routing rules, and identity provider, all of it can be, we can use these ASNs over there as well to write different types of policies. Then define IP types for their dynamic zone. The IP type setting checks and determines if a client uses a proxy and the type of proxy is one if one is identified. The following settings are available to define an IP for a dynamic zone. We can use any proxy. We can use Tor anonymizer proxy and not Tor anonymizer proxy. So basically, any means you can ignore all the proxy types. If selected, at least one of the following must be defined. That is your location, ISP, ASNs. Then any proxy considers clients that uses a Tor anonymizer proxy or a non-Tor anonymizer proxy type. Tor anonymizer proxy will only consider those clients which uses it, and non-Tor will only consider those clients which doesn't use that. So that's pretty much it about our network, network zones. It's again, something to see on more on practical, but fundamentally we have covered what all theory part we have under network zones. We can, see a little bit of practical thing of what we have just seen, or what we have just discussed till now in our advanced training. Then next thing which we have is the behavior detection. Now this is again, a very important thing in Okta for us to understand. There are different types of behaviors which can be detected in Okta based on, different factors. You have location, IP, device, and velocity, with which, you can define a behavior of an individual or a person. And, based on this behavior, there are basically actions being taken in Okta. So, you can write a behavior detection or add a behavior detection, and you could see there are certain behavior detections being added over here, wherein you have given a name to it, you have decided what type of behavior it is, and eventually that you have kind of written a policy or a rule that if the location granularity is city, then evaluate against the authentication, which means that uh, basically if the city of the user is getting changed again and again, maybe like within 20 authentication the city has same, so automatically the behavior of that user would be detected in Okta and it would take an action upon it. So if the country is getting changed of the user, like today I'm in US, then next day I'm in India, then third day I'm in Pakistan, somewhere in Nepal, so that behavior would be detected by Okta, and it would be, if in case Okta feels that this is a malicious or a suspicious behavior, in that scenario, actions would be taken. So that's what hackers do. Like they'll see that they are currently sitting in South Africa, and once someone is trying to track them, their IP range changes from South Africa to New York, from New York to Japan, Japan to China. That's how they keep on fluctuating their IP range, and they keep on making a fool of the person who is trying to track them. So that's why Okta has this behavior detection, in which whenever the location or the device or the city or a velocity is changing, Okta will detect that behavior and it will automatically take action upon it. And also you could see that we can define the set of authentications, like the number of authentications at which they would be making Okta would be taking an action on. So basically if in case I am in a new geolocation, which means that my latitude and longitude should have a distance of at least 20 kilometers. So in that state, I would say that I would consider that as a new geolocation. But I could still go ahead and change that, like from 20 kilometers to maybe 100 kilometers or to 1000 kilometers. That is something based on the organizational policy. But the important thing for us to understand is that we should add the behaviors over here in order for Okta to understand whether it's a malicious user or not a malicious user. So that's all what we have under behavior detection. Next, we have the administrators tab. So under administrators, we have, different types of administrators. We have the option to add administrators. And also, I have one PPT slide where, we can see what are the different types of administrators. So we have a super admin administrator, which has the highest level of privileges in Okta. It has, got all the task and permission sets in Okta. Then we have an org admin who can, do most of the things being done by the super admin, but they can perform most of the org wide settings, can perform all the management tasks for users, groups, and mobile policies and devices. They cannot perform any application management tasks. So that's the difference between a super and an org. An org admin is the second highest level of privileges we have in Okta. Then you can have a user admin who can create and you add users, deactivate users, reset passwords. They can also be used to restrict their tasks to a select group or groups of Okta users. Then you have app users admin, then who can run reports and manage profile information. They can also view users and groups but not modify either, and they can manage information on applications to which they are assigned access. Then you have read-only users which can only review and view the reports. They can just view users, groups, and apps, but cannot modify any settings. They can view but not modify organizational settings. And then finally, you have mobile access, mobile admin access, who has full access to the mobile-related permission sets and has limited access on non-mobile-related permission sets. So that's like your different administrator roles which we have in Okta. Then finally, you have this API and API token. This is actually one tab only. If you'll see that, we are getting to API only. So this is kind of a single tab only over here in API. Over here in API, you'll have, authorization server, which is important if you're talking about an OIDC app. And then, API tokens are required for, you to automate a lot of things in Okta. Like, you are being adding the users manually, or you are integrating applications manually, or you are creating MFA policies manually. Whatever we see on the admin UI, right, that can all everything can be done in Okta using an API. And for us to do through an API, we require an API token. So whenever I can go ahead and create a test token. Once this is created, I can only view it once, so I have to copy it and okay, got it. And this would see that this would show me who has created the token, by what level of privileges that user has, and when this would expire and stuff like that. If I do not use this token for the next 30 days, automatically this token would be expired. That's why you'll see a different, it says that expires on June 14. So basically, whenever I'll create it after 30 days, this would be expired. So that's kind of a token, and it's required because we have to whenever we are making use of Okta APIs, API tokens are the most important things, that or the prerequisite or the very first thing which we require in order to configure an Okta API. So I'll just revoke my token. And then you have trusted origins also. Under trusted origins, like if in case you are doing a JavaScript, you're building an application on JavaScript, in that scenario, and there is a request coming from same domain or some different domain, you want to add that origin of the domain over here, then you can just go ahead and add it. So you can select course or redirect if as per your requirement. This is altogether a different concept and advanced level concept, so I'm not discussing a lot in the fundamentals class. But people who code on JavaScript, they'll understand that sometimes origins needs to be trusted. Then only they would be able to access Okta APIs through their JavaScript code, and in order to do that, they have to add origins over here in Okta, so that the request is being granted by Okta when it hits the when the JavaScript application hits the Okta environment. So that's pretty much it under what we have under security tab. So we have basically covered all of these topics today. We have covered general health insights, authentication, MFA, IDP, delegated authentication, network, behavior detection, administrator, and finally the APIs of Okta. We have a lot of things to cover under APIs of Okta. We haven't seen what are the different types of APIs of Okta, how do we add users through APIs and all, but that and all is covered under advanced training. Under fundamental section, we have seen that what are the different types of stuff which we have in Okta, and we have kind of given an overview of how all of these things help and why do we have these tabs in and what purpose do they solve. So that's pretty much it from my end. So let's go ahead to the Okta tenant and see whatever we have under the admin console. So as far as what we have completed till now is that we have seen the directory tab. We have gone through all these directory tabs. Then we have also gone through all the security, whatever and headings we have under security tab. We have seen that. Under applications also, we have seen how do we integrate applications. we'll be creating this, in Okta integration network. That's altogether a different topic, so we'll cover that in our last video. And then, today we are going to see about these two tabs, that is dashboard and the customizations. Although these are not very, not something that should be covered under the fundamentals topic, but especially customizations, because this is the recent feature which has been introduced by Okta. So we'll just have a quick overview of what these are all about, and we'll see what are they, what actually do they contain. So I'll go to the dashboard tab first. That's the very first tab that we see on our Okta. And over here we'll see whatever we'll whatever the dashboard we have for the Okta. So over here, when I click on the dashboard, right, so as an Okta administrator, I can see the dashboard of my Okta application. I can see that how many users are there in last 7 days, how many groups we have created, how many applications are using single sign-on. Then I can see that what is the Okta service, are there any agents required or not, what is the status of those agents, if I have any agent integrated on my Okta environment. Then under task, we have like what all things we need to do. If you guys remember, you would have, I have shown it to you that what exactly are the things to be which Okta recommends under Okta Threat Insights. So these are all the tasks which Okta accumulates and shows over here, which we need to complete as an Okta administrator. And then it helps us to provide some information about which application is able to do provisioning, which is not able to do provisioning, and stuff like that. Then there are some org changes which would have happened in last few days, so that's what it is showing to us. If I just view all of them, so I could see that it's showing me that who basically it has redirected me to the logs page now. But over here, if I need to see something, it just tells me like which policy was updated and by whom it was updated, on which date and timestamp and all. So and also we have the rate limit monitoring. So basically whenever we use APIs of Okta, so we have a rate limit monitoring for those APIs. So we can monitor it from the dashboard itself. And security monitoring is something which we have already seen under here under security and health insight. So over here, whatever task we have completed, if I go here, I have 78% task. So that is something I'll see some similar on my dashboard as well. So that's pretty much it about our Okta dashboard. So basically a dashboard, as the name suggests, it basically helps you to provide all the information, whatever major changes that are happening on your organization or on your tenant, and major things which you need to worry about or take care on, and how are things going or how are things happening. We can see all complete consolidated report or an overview of all those things on a single page. That is the dashboard of Okta. Now if I go ahead to the next thing, that is task, I see that I have around 42 tasks to be completed, and they says that application account needs deprovisioning. So basically that's what my 42 tasks are, that in which I have got total 3 applications, and under these applications I have got 3 tasks for test report, 20 tasks for OpenID client, and 19 tasks for this test web app or Pranjal web app. So basically I need to just go through and check what are all the tasks I have. So this particular user is auto deprovisioning is not available for this app, so we need to manually deprovision the user this account in the app. So basically I can mark it as completed, and I can select what was the resolution I have done. Maybe I'll say that it's a personal account and it's not required. Same thing I'll do over here as well, because all of them requires deprovisioning, so I'll say that it's not required. And now you'll see that one by one, slowly all my tasks would be gone. So now it's happening, I guess. So I think I have some tasks which is not allowing me to do it directly. I'll try this over here as well once. So now I'm left with 99. So I think it now it's more of like that we need to do it manually one by one. But that's how you need to go ahead and take action on these particular tasks and whatever are the tasks which we have pending under the task section of the dashboard column. Then if we go to the next setting, that is the notification. So whatever notifications you get on your screen, you could see it over here. Also, if you want to send a message to someone or certain groups or users, you could just send it, and all those end users are going to receive a notification from the organization at the organization level. And this is the very first page which we see on every class, that is that's getting started with Okta. So basically whatever our application can support and what are the functionalities of this application, we could view all of them under the getting started tab of dashboard. So that's pretty much it. It's very easy for us to understand the dashboard tab. And the next what we have on our plate is the customizations tab. This has been recently introduced by Okta. Now, a lot of times what happens is that, see, if I'm using this is a trial version of my account, but it's using, it has given me a web address URL, which I don't like it, because, I don't want to use this thing, or I know that, no one would be able to remember this URL. So basically, I want to use a custom URL domain for which I have already purchased the license for from, I've already purchased the domain, let's say. So I want to, replace this URL with that particular thing. So I have the option to, finally go ahead and replace my URL. And that can only be done if I have a domain being purchased. So right now, I don't have any domains being purchased, so we cannot have a practical shown for it. But that's what this, customization helps us to do, that, if you want to change the domain or the URL of your application of your tenant, you can go ahead and do it. Also, sometimes it requires that you want to do certain branding on your application on your tenant, because you just want to show it, because right now I have a tenant which just shows the branding of Okta. But let's suppose if I have my own organization and I want to show the branding of my organization, then there is a way we can all upload the themes and decide on the colors and stuff like that. So that can be done under the customization tab. Then whatever you see on the sign in page, what that Okta page comes up, right, like this. If I just have to show you maybe once. Okay, sorry, I'm already logged in, so it will not work over here, but let me show it on the incognito window. So over here, this particular screen that comes up, right, if you want to change the, the look and feel of this, or, if I want to change something, that can be done by editing the, this HTML code which has been written for this particular page. So that can be done as well. Then if in case, we want to change the error page, whatever errors are being we want the errors to be displayed in some other manners, then again we have the code written for it. You can change the HTML content of that code, and accordingly the error messages would pop up. Then if you want to customize the footer of your application, so that can be done by that can be done again. So basically, you can go ahead and either select it's powered by Okta or it's not powered by Okta. So for me, I'm fine having it powered by Okta, because this is my personal account. Then what are all the emails being sent by Okta tenant at different levels, that can be seen from emails tab. If you, whenever a user is activated, or an AD user is activated, or LDAP user is activated, this is how emails are being triggered. So if if you're using a paid version, because as it says this is a paid feature, if you're using a paid version, you can go ahead and customize it. Since I am having a trial version, so it doesn't allow me to customize it. But whatever emails have been triggered from Okta, you can customize all of those emails from Okta itself. Then we have a SMS, whatever SMS are being sent from Okta to the phones, we can add a translation, or we can decide which language it will go. I can decide any language, and emails messages would be triggered in that language. So basically that can be done from here. And then finally you have the other customizations available, in which you can see the user account information or the display language. Currently it's English. If I change it to some other, it would change, and now everything would be changed. If I go in, maybe. Okay, I think could be possible that it's not available in the free version, so that's fine. We'll go back and we'll change the language to English only. Otherwise, we won't understand what we are trying to learn here. Okay. So and then under sign in page, what are all the things we'll be able to see, and then what are the communication things. Then sometimes we use deprovisioning or just in time provisioning, so we can mark or edit these things from here. And that's it. Like we have some other configurations which we might be using, so we could just come in and make the changes here and the other customizations, and our tenant would accordingly work. So that's pretty much it for the dashboard and customizations. These are very basic tabs. You might not be using it for most of the times, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what they are and what they consist. So that's it from my end. We'll see in the next video with the workflows, reports, and settings, which is an important part for Okta. So we have gone through the dashboard, directory, customizations, applications. Although we haven't seen these two, that is the Okta integration network or the self-service. And then after that we have completed the security tab. We have understood each and every subheadings which we have under security. And today we'll start off with the workflow. Now workflows aren't supposed to be covered under the fundamental training, so I would just be giving you some idea, some brief about what workflows we have in Okta and how these workflows help us to ease our process in Okta. Also this is not available in the free trial version, so even if someone wants to go ahead and create certain automations in Okta, or write workflows in Okta, I mean, workflows are not free of cost. They are available in the paid version, and automations you can do, but there aren't any much automations which you can do from this particular page. So I think I have been logged out from my ID, so I'll just quickly log in. Yeah. Okay, so if I was talking about workflows, so over here if I go to the automations tabs of workflows, so I have certain automations which I can create, but these doesn't allow me a large variety of automations to be created here in Okta. It's basically based on the user's lifecycle management that I can go ahead and create an automation. But there is a workflow console. I cannot see it because I do not have that licensed version of workflow. But when you have the licensed version, in that you get an option of workflow over here, by which you can write proper workflows, which helps you to automate a lot of process in Okta. So we'll try to understand what are automations in Okta. So under automations and hooks, you can create workflows. So Okta provides features that enables you to automate and customize your Okta processes. With these automations, you can prepare for and response to situations that occur during the life cycles of the end user who are assigned to an Okta group. Event hooks enable you to trigger process flows within your own software systems. And with inline hooks, you can pause your workflows to make outbound calls to your own custom code. So basically, event hooks, it enables you to trigger your process within your own system, whereas inline hooks, they make outbound calls to your custom code what you have written. So automation, they respond to changes in your end user's life cycle. Event hooks triggers process flows in your own software system, and inline hooks integrate your custom code to the outbound calls or the Okta workflows. So talking about automations, Okta automations enable you to quickly prepare and respond to situations that occur during the life cycle of end users who are assigned to an Okta group. This helps improve efficiency and satisfaction amongst partners and contingent workforce. For example, an automation can help for inactivity loco employee suits, if a user has been inactive for a set of number of days and is on the verge of being logged out, you can use an automation to alert the inactive user in advance. So basically, whenever a logged out user is going to be inactive in Okta, or it's on almost on the verge of getting logged out, so it would automatically send an email alert to the end user saying that you need to log in, or you need to do certain action in order to remain your account active, keep your account active. So that's like an automation. Okta is doing it on its own. You don't have to worry, though. You don't have to manually inform the user that go ahead and change your password or do certain activity so that your account is not logged out. It would be done automatically by Okta. So this is an efficient way of notifying the user so that the user can take the necessary steps before the locking out of his account. So you can set up an automation by defining the following items. It could be defined based on conditions, the criteria that triggers Okta to perform actions upon a group of end users. For each automation, you can choose one condition to apply to one or more groups. Conditions can be scheduled to run once or to recur daily. The following conditions are available, which are user inactivity in Okta or the password expiration in Okta. These conditions are triggered according to a schedule and can be applied to one or more groups. Conditions are mandatory for automations on recurring schedules. So maybe this is kind of too much of theoretical, so I'll just go back to my Okta screen now, and I'll just walk you through to the automations tasks which we see here in Okta. Under workflow, you see automations, inline hooks and event hooks. We have discussed all of them one by one. We are currently talking about automation. So I'll if I have to create a test automation, so maybe test automation MindMajix, I'll create one automation name. And now I've created an automation. It is asking me to add a condition, then only it will perform an action. Unless it does not have a condition, it cannot perform an action. So I can go ahead and select a condition. Only it allows me two conditions to select: either a user is going to be inactive in Okta or the password expiration. So I'm saying like whenever the user is getting inactive for maybe like 90 days, so user hasn't used Okta for 90 days, I would say that just change the user lifecycle state and make it suspended or deactivated maybe. And so any user who hasn't been able to log into Okta for next 90 days or hasn't done any activity in Okta for 90 days, they would be deactivated automatically. So we don't have to track every user. Okta would be doing it with the help of this automation. So that's how automation helps us to build effective manners, or build us effective way of help us to build it in an efficient manner, so that we don't have to worry about it for everything. Okay, so maybe we can save this, and it applies to everyone. And now now I can just activate it. So now going forward, any user who would be active in Okta for 90 days, that user would automatically be deactivated, and it will run every day at 9:58 AM IST. So every day at this point of time, it will run this automation. It will check if any user has been inactive for 90 days, it will just deactivate it. So that's how strong automations are. Next are inline hooks. So they are the outbound calls from Okta to your own custom code, which are triggered at specific point in Okta process flows. They allow you to integrate custom functionality into those flows. You can implement your own custom code as a web service with internet accessible endpoint. It's your responsibility to arrange the hosting of your code on a system external to Okta, and Okta defines the REST API contract for the request it sends to your custom code, as well as for the responses your custom code can send back. The outbound call from Okta is called a hook. So that call happening from Okta is called as a hook. Your code which receives the call is referred to as the external service. Inline hooks are synchronous calls, which means that Okta processes the triggered hook is paused until a response from a service is received. So synchronous and asynchronous means that whenever the request is gone, until it is paused unless the response is received back. Asynchronous calls are, it will keep on sending the request. It doesn't matter whether it's receiving back the response or not. So now talking about the event hooks, they are outbound calls from Okta that triggers process flows within your own software system. They are sent when specific events occur in your organization, and they deliver information about the event. Unlike inline hooks, event hooks are asynchronous. So last one we mentioned was synchronous, now they are asynchronous, and they do not offer a way to execute the Okta process flow. After sending the call, the Okta process continues without waiting for a response from the call service. So to set up an event hook, you need to implement a web service within an internet accessible endpoint, and it's your responsibility to arrange hosting of your code on a system external to Okta. Okta defines the REST API contract for the request, and it sends you a custom code, as well as for the responses your custom code can send back. So the main difference is, one is inline, so that is, they are the calls from Okta to your own custom code, whereas our event hooks, they are outbound calls from Okta that triggers the process flows within your own system. So there are details to this which are being covered in the advanced training, but right now we can understand the basic difference between the inline hooks and the event hooks. So that's it with regards to the workflows tab which we have in Okta. Next, we'll try to understand the reporting part which we have in Okta. This is again a very important part, being asked a lot in interviews. And why we need to understand this reporting stuff is because anything not working in Okta, anything where we require logs in Okta, everything would be under the report section of Okta. So if I directly go to the report section of Okta, it helps me to provide certain reports or certain things, certain detailed reports, I would say, which would help us to analyze our Okta organization. Analyze the organization in which Okta has been deployed or set up. So if I want to get the report of Okta password help, so it will send it to my email ID, and I can just download it from there. So maybe I'll just go back to my email ID, and I could see that there would be a report which would have been generated. So see, this is the latest email I got. So I can directly download the report from Okta. And once I've downloaded the report, so I have the CSV file with me, in which I can go ahead and check, okay, which user has logged in, what is the status, what is the deactivation. So password health and all could be managed from this particular report. We don't have to worry about how to generate it. We can directly request from Okta, and from there we can do it. Same happens for application reports, authentication, troubleshooting and all. So whatever reports as per your requirement you need, you can directly come to the report section here in Okta and directly download it. Then next most important things are your system logs. So you see, there are a lot of actors and events which have been there are total of 185 events which we can see on my screen, right? So basically there are a lot of events which are created, and all these events help us to understand with whom they have been occurred. So like this event has been occurred with Vibhor Garg, that is the actor. Okay, so basically if I don't know how do I get the reports of a particular person. So maybe I just I just did something on maybe like application, maybe test application, and I don't know what to do about that. So maybe I can just write that keyword over here in the search, and then actually search it. Just make sure that you have the date selected properly, because there could be a possibility that you haven't selected the right set of dates, and then you are trying to maybe find something. So maybe see, I have just increased the date and I have just written demo. So there has to be some demo, some targets, or somewhere the demo would be there as a keyword over here in one of the targets, actor or event, and that's why it shows me like all those logs which are there. Basically these logs are being generated based on the query. So I have just clicked on that, and you could see that there is a query being generated. But we as an Okta developer, there could be a possibility that we might not know what query to write. In those scenarios, as I mentioned before, we just need to write the keywords with which we want to search it, and with those keywords we'll be able to get all the logs associated with that, wherever Okta will find that keyword in that particular stipulated time frame. So next we have the import monitoring. This is basically for your Active Directory or the LDAP agents which are integrated with Okta. So any agent which is integrated with Okta and any set of users which are being imported in Okta, we can monitor from here. So that's what the import monitoring do. If in case there is something failing or something completed, we can track the progress from the import monitoring tab. And then there are certain API rate limits here in Okta, which helps us to understand what is the event that happened per hour, and how much what Okta APIs are we using, is it violating or not. So all of these things can be verified or viewed from here. Once if there is certain violation, we can check and accordingly take the action upon it. So that's pretty much it about the report section that we have. Next we have the settings. It's very basic thing to understand. Under settings we have accounts, so you have the organizational account. I can change the name of the company, or I can add certain information about my organization, who would be the billing person to this particular ID. Okta would be reaching out whenever the contract would get over, and all the end user support and admin email notifications. I mean some general third party configurations and all general settings of the application could be configured from this particular tab. Then we have features tab, in which Okta generally helps us to understand what are their upcoming features on what are they currently working on, and what are their preview features, and what all they have closed and stuff like that. So we can try, if someone is interested to know what are the recent activities or recent features being developed by Okta, they can come in here to the features and check what is that. And then finally you have download. So if in case you want to download certain things like the agents, or the IWA agents, or the Active Directory agents, or LDAP agents, radius agents, you can directly go to the downloads tab of Okta, and from here you will get all of that in for free of cost. I mean, you don't have to manually kind of go to browser in order to search all of them. Whatever products Okta requires, all of them could be found over here in the downloads tab of Okta. So that's pretty much it with regards to the admin console.